Hey everyone, it's Pastor Alec back again with Eli. How's it going?
I'm pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Doing all right.
Yeah.
We're still reading through Genesis.
Yep.
And what'd you read this week?
Read 29 through 33 this week.
29 to 33. Okay.
A lot about Jacob.
Yeah, a lot about Jacob.
I started off, my first question I had was in 29 chapter, or verse 26.
Okay.
Laban said, "It is not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one."
Yeah.
So did Jacob have to marry Leah in order to take Rachel as his wife?
Yes. Well, apparently so. I mean, that's kind of what Laban forces
Right.
him into. He tricks him, though. He does make him think that he gets to marry Rachel before Leah.
Right.
And, if that's the custom, Laban, why didn't you say that in the first place?
Right. Yeah, I was also thinking he was keeping him to work.
Yes.
So he can get both of them and
He
have to work
is.
14 years. Yeah.
Yes, I think last time we talked about how Jacob is a bit of a trickster,
Right.
and so is Laban.
Yeah.
And you really you see it in Abraham,
Yeah.
and then some in Sarah,
Yeah.
and then you see it in Rebecca,
Yeah.
and then you see it in her brother Laban. Remember, because Rebecca and
Yeah.
Laban are brother and sister.
Right.
And then you see it in Jacob, and then later on you're going to see it in Rachel,
Yeah.
and
You think they all trick each other? You think they wouldn't be able to get tricked?
yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, they out-trick each other. I think
Right.
that's the thing. They out-trick each other. And they really are besting each other in a way that you don't see in other parts of the Bible. I
Right.
don't know. I mean, I guess you do see it in some places. People get tricked, but there seems to be something about this nuclear family and the nuclear families that kind of come out of it here that they're tricking each other
Right.
a lot.
And I didn't really think much about Laban tricking
Yeah.
Jacob until I read like 33 where Jacob fled.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And then how many children did Jacob have in total?
Okay. It's hard to tell how many children Jacob had in total. We know that he has 12 sons.
Right.
And a daughter.
Right.
So, did he have other daughters? I don't know.
That was also one of my questions.
Right. So he's got the 12 sons, which are the 12 tribes
Yeah.
of Jacob, and Jacob, of course, is renamed
Yeah.
when he's on the run, leaving Laban, coming back. So he's renamed Israel, and so those then the 12 tribes of Jacob are the 12 tribes of Israel, and those are all the sons.
Right.
And then there's the daughter Dinah, and if he had other sons, then they would be part of those. They would be counted. You would see that in the narrative.
Yeah.
But with Dinah, you don't really see. I don't remember. Do you see her? Do you see the account of her being born? You see the other. It says Leah had this many children, and then then you get the concubines,
Right.
right, and then Rachel finally has children. And you're talking about the sons, but I'm trying to recall if you see Dinah, the daughter, being born.
I'm not sure. I may have mentioned it because I had a question.
Like in
about-
passing or something.
Right. Or it may have said he had a daughter
Well-
after this.
Well, we know that Dinah, Dinah's important a little bit later on as an adult because Dinah gets raped by a man named Shechem, and the brothers are very upset about this.
Yeah.
And Shechem wants to marry Dinah, and they say, well, if you and your whole he's a prince, if you and your whole city get circumcised, then we will intermarry with your people.
Right.
And then Simeon and Levi, once the men of the city, all the men of the city have to get circumcised,
Yeah.
or the village have to get circumcised, and once they do, after a few days while they're still recovering, Simeon and Levi go in and they kill all the men
Oh, wow.
as like a revenge killing for their sister.
Right.
What happened to their sister Dinah? So we do see Dinah in that part of the narrative, but I don't recall seeing her birth, which tells me, and maybe it's there, and I've just overlooked it. But if that is the case, then that tells me that, or maybe suggests that maybe there were other daughters.
Right.
I don't know. So I mean, the ones that are named, we have 13 children, the 12 sons, and then the daughter Dinah. Were there other daughters? I don't know.
Right. Okay.
That's a long answer to your question.
Yeah. So at the end of 30,
Mm-hmm.
I'll have to go look back. When Jacob asked Laban for his speckled flock,
Yes.
give me your speckled flock.
Yes.
Now, did he take kind of like selective breeding to make a speckled
Yes.
flock? Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
It was
Yes.
kind of hard, like understanding what he said.
Yes. This is like Jacob and his flocks are like Mendel and his peas.
Right.
He's like doing, I don't know, it was like some kind of genetic experiment or something.
Right.
But no, he's breeding them in a certain way, and they're producing the speckled flocks, and that means they belong to Jacob.
Right.
Right. And Laban gets very upset about this.
Oh, yeah.
So he's tapped into some recessive gene or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Codominance.
Yeah, that's right. There you go.
Let's see.
So he really does end up with, he makes a lot of Laban's flock his own flock.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And so Laban sees this and he says, "You're stealing from me."
Yeah.
And Jacob, in Jacob's mind, is, well, that was the agreement, but Jacob is besting Laban
Right.
within the bounds of the agreement.
Yeah. You see why they have contracts now.
Yes, that's right. And of course, this is also written as it is a blessing of God to Jacob.
Right.
So it's not just like Jacob is just besting Laban and he got away with it or something.
Right.
This is a mechanism which God uses to bless Jacob.
Yeah.
Right. His chosen one, for his chosen family, for his chosen tribes, for his chosen people.
Right.
Right. So.
Yeah, because it said he had a dream about the speckled and the spotted flock.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you see, and I guess maybe that's something else. It's don't discount a dream. Not a lot of people in the Bible have dreams.
Right.
It's not like it's a super common thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think we talk about it that way, but very few people actually have dreams. You see dreams in this part of Genesis. You also see dreams in Daniel, the book of Daniel,
Okay.
with Nebuchadnezzar's dreams.
Yeah.
And you see in Daniel the same thing. He has then it kind of turns into visions, and then you see in the prophets night visions,
Right.
like in Zechariah or something.
Okay.
And so it's not like it's this common thing. So it actually, the fact that God shows up to Abraham and talks to Abraham,
Right.
like under the oaks of Mamre, he is there.
Right.
And we talked about this, like what does it really mean for the Lord to be there, kind of in three people or
Yeah.
something, and he's there, and so as the narrative changes, again he's there with Adam and Eve, also at the beginning of Genesis. So as the narrative changes from the creation narrative, remember, is like chapters 1 through 11,
Right.
and then the Abraham narrative, which goes from again like 12 to 25, 26, and then it kind of goes into the Jacob narrative,
Right.
which goes until 35, 36, and then it goes into the Joseph narrative, which is from like 35, 36 to 50, the end of
Right.
Genesis.
Yeah.
And of course, Jacob is still alive at that point, but he dies at the end of Genesis, but it's not really about him anymore.
Yeah.
And in each narrative, in the creation narrative, 1 through 11, and then the Abraham narrative, Abraham and Sarah, 12 to 25 or something, God shows up and he speaks.
Right.
With Jacob and Joseph, you see the dreams happening,
Yeah.
which is different.
Right.
It's like God shows up in a different way.
Well, and then later on, I can't remember what chapter it was, but when Jacob wrestled with God,
Yes.
he didn't necessarily speak with him.
Well, that's also a very bizarre encounter. See,
Right.
with Abraham, God shows up and he's there and he talks to him.
Right.
The whole thing about, Jacob wrestling with God, it's not even clear exactly with whom he's wrestling.
Yeah.
Is it God? Is it an angel of God? Is it some guy who represents God?
Right.
It's very difficult to kind of, so even that kind of shows the distance that's there between like God and Jacob and God and Joseph that doesn't seem to be there with Abraham and certainly not with Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
Right? God is operating differently, and scholars have picked up on that.
Okay.
And some scholars have tried to say, well, it's a different God because he's going by a different name.
Yeah.
So you actually, in this part, as Genesis progresses, you actually see the word for God is used a lot more than his name Yahweh.
Yeah, and I also, face of God.
Okay.
When they were talking about the pillar.
Yeah,
Was that about the pillar?
like in the presence of God and
Yeah, with Laban and Jacob's covenant.
yeah. Well, that also shows you he is not really there in the same way.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So it's like a remembrance.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's this God seems to be in some ways more distant in this part of the narrative. And again, some scholars have tried to say, well, this is a different Canaanite God.
Right.
There's the Canaanite God Yahweh, and there's the Canaanite God El or Elohim.
Yeah.
Right? And they've tried to account for that. But I think what it's the name, the proper name Yahweh, that's God's name, and then there's Elohim, which was a name for a Canaanite god.
Right.
But in Hebrew, it's used as just the word God, like a
Okay.
proper noun.
Yeah.
Or like just like a noun,
'Cause
God.
That's, not exactly what Jesus said on the cross, but he said a version of Elohim, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Eloi, Eloi,
Yeah.
lama sabachthani. Right. So yeah, my God, right?
Right.
And that's when you see it you can even see this in the names. So Jacob is renamed Israel,
Yeah.
El, which stands for God.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Okay, and so that's the versus other names that have like a Yah at the end or an Ah. It
Yeah.
usually stands for Yahweh,
Okay.
right? And so you can see that in the various names,
Right.
But again, I think it just kind of shows that God. He operates differently. He's the same, but he operates differently as the human condition changes, but also you see a narrowing in on the story, on the narrative. The Abraham narrative covers a lot more ground
Yeah.
than, let's say, the Jacob and Joseph narratives do.
Right.
I mean, the Joseph narrative is basically about at one point in Joseph's life.
Yeah.
That's what it's really focused on. So it's way different than the Abraham narrative, which covers decades.
Right, yeah.
Right?
His whole life.
His
until he
whole life,
dies.
right? And so I think it just kind of shows that, if you really had to focus on one point in Abraham's life, I mean, how many times has God actually talked to him?
Right.
Not a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
several
Like
times.
2 or 3.
Yeah, a few
Maybe
times.
5.
And they're spread out by like decades.
Yeah.
And so it also just kind of shows you that, as I think I said this before, moving from Genesis gets you from the beginning of the whole world, the cosmos, right, to a very specific point in time for a very specific people group.
Okay.
And this is just a part of that transition.
Yeah.
Right? Just the changes in the narrative, the narrative has to change to make that transition.
Right.
It has to go from the story of everything to the human condition, which ends in 11, Tower of Babel, to then focus on Abraham and then get even more specific, and not just specific about who we're talking about, but specific events. Like it has to begin with the beginning of everything, and it has to kind of end with the people of Israel in Egypt.
Okay, yeah.
And for the setup then for the
Exodus,
Exodus. right? So there's a lot of, so even the way that God is talked about and the way that you see him interact, everything changes in order to make that setup happen, because the big event, the event that's going to change everything is the Exodus. And you have to think, if Moses is writing Genesis, where do you see Moses? In the Exodus event, right? So it's all kind of, this is the Exodus event is kind of the culmination of it. So yeah, the way that you talk about God is actually going to change a little bit.
Okay. Yeah.
Which is, I find interesting. But
Right. So when Laban, well, first of all, how come Laban was able to speak to Jacob when God told him not to speak to him good or bad? Or be careful what you say.
I think that's more be careful what you say to him.
Okay.
Go to the. Do you have a verse for that, by the way? Just curious.
Yeah, 31:24.
31:24. When it was told Laban on the third day, that Jacob had fled, he took his kinsman with him and pursued him for 7 days and followed close after him into the hill country of Gilead. But God came to Laban, the Aramean, in a dream by night and said to him, "Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad." So I think there's probably different ways to interpret that. Besides, just it's. Actually, I don't have it with me, but I would be interested to compare that Hebrew. I've not looked at that in Hebrew, comparing that Hebrew text to the formulation in Genesis 2 about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Oh yeah.
Usually, good and evil is like a Hebrew idiom that kind of means everything.
Yeah.
But I think here it's a warning of, you better just be very careful with what you say to him. I mean, you could read it as don't talk to him at all. You could read it as talk to him in a way that's measured.
Okay.
So about nothing good or bad, but
just like there in the middle.
That's right.
Yeah.
Just be very measured and be very careful.
Right.
And just because God tells him to be careful doesn't mean that Laban's actually going to be careful.
Right. Well, then also, because he had his own household gods, I was going to ask why did he listen to God, first of all? And second of all, did everyone have their own household gods?
A lot of people did, yeah. So remember, he is not, Laban is not with the Abraham group.
Right.
Okay, so they are relatives.
Yeah.
So he's from the same family as Abraham. Isaac marries Rebekah, Laban's brother, and that all comes from their same family.
Right.
But it seems like Abraham is the monotheist.
Yeah.
He believes in one God. It doesn't mean that Laban does also.
Right.
Laban might also believe in Yahweh.
Okay.
But he probably believes in other gods too.
Right.
And you see that's very common in the Old Testament.
Right.
This is going to be something that's difficult, I think, to tease out, but important for us to tease out or make a distinction. The ancient Israelites were not monotheists.
Really?
They were supposed to be.
Okay.
And that's the distinction. So the prophets are.
Right.
There's, Moses is.
Right.
There is one true God, but for so much of the Old Testament, it's the prophets telling the ancient Israelites there's only one God, and them not believing the prophets.
Yeah.
Case in point, after God leads the people out of Egypt, the Israelites out of Egypt.
Oh yeah.
Moses up on the mountain, they think he's dead, and what do? They worship other gods. I mean, immediately. So that's very common. I mean, so for most of the history of Israel, they're not monotheists.
Right. Well, he put the serpent on a stick.
Yeah, Moses did.
Because they were worshiping other gods, and he said, "Worship only this."
Well, no. That's you've got that mixed up a little bit here. They've got they disobey God, or they complain. He sends snakes to bite them, like vipers.
Okay, yeah.
To bite them. And Moses puts a bronze one up on a pole and says, "If you look to this one, you'll be healed."
Right.
Later on, several hundred years later, you can see they still have that pole that Moses made, and then they're worshiping that.
Yeah,
Which
okay.
again shows you they're not worshiping the way,
Right.
and they had all these high places set up. And so again, I think this is what really distinguishes the true God from the other gods. For one, you don't see any of the. It was a professor of mine who once pointed out to me in the Old Testament. He said, I challenge you, find in the Old Testament some place where, and this is at a secular university. He
Right.
said some place where any of these other gods that are mentioned actually have any agency. Like, do they actually ever do anything?
Right.
So, and they don't.
Right.
And so the writers of the Old Testament know that there's only one God.
Yeah.
Okay, all the prophets, but the people of Israel continually go after other gods.
Right.
And the Canaanites who were around them it's problematic when the Canaanites did worship Yahweh, the one true God,
Right.
in addition to a bunch of other gods.
Yeah.
Which is problematic. I mean, the Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, he was the high priest of Midian. And the Midianites, there have been found inscriptions where there's an inscription where the Midianites, they worshipped Yahweh
Right.
and Asherah as the king and queen of heaven. So they believe in Yahweh, but they also
Yeah.
believe in Asherah,
Right.
which you can see throughout the entire Old Testament. The Israelites are going after Asherah,
Right.
and also going after Baal, who's another Midianite, or not Midianite, another Canaanite god.
Right.
Okay, and the other Canaanite god is El, which in Hebrew is just the word for God.
Right.
So you can see why this might be confusing for some of these people, right?
Yeah.
So he's got his household gods, and who takes the household gods?
Rachel.
Rachel takes them, right? So Rachel takes the household gods, and Laban knows this, and he's upset, and she hides them, right, in a place that he's not going to look.
Right.
And so even Rachel is going after that. Oh yeah, sure, I believe in the God,
Right, yeah.
Jacob, my husband. I believe in your God. I also want to take the household gods with me.
Right.
So,
Can't have both.
But it shouldn't be surprising to us that you see this. I think I think sometimes we like to think that the people of God are so much more pious or something. And in some
Right.
sense, they are. That she cared about the household gods.
Yeah.
But not the piety that is actually trusting in the one true God.
Right.
And that's actually much less common than we want it to be
Oh yeah.
in the Old Testament. So
I'm starting to learn that now.
yeah.
Because you don't know every detail of the stories unless you read them.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things, in Sunday school, we always read stories of, this is the people of God were in trouble or something, and God saves them.
Right.
And yeah, good,
Yeah.
and then there's that bad golden calf incident and all that, and you don't realize that the golden calf in the Old Testament is actually probably more the norm for the
Golden
people of
calf.
Israel, where they worship the golden calf in the desert when
Oh,
that
okay, yeah.
after they think Moses is dead up on Mount Sinai.
Right.
And that golden calf incident it's probably more common than not throughout
Right.
the Old. That's the norm.
It's weird.
It's weird. I know it's weird, but when you realize that, then the prophets make more sense.
Okay.
And you realize how frustrated they were and how difficult it was to prophesy, and this is why they're always on the run for their lives.
Right.
Like Elijah's on the run for his life, and so really, what would be interesting? I mean, we're going to keep moving through Genesis, but
Yeah.
which sets a lot of this up. You see all of this at play in Genesis, which is why Genesis is such an important book.
Right.
But it would be interesting then to do something like First or Second Kings.
Yeah.
And you see that all at play in the people of God, and kind of this weird time during the divided or the united then divided kingdom.
Right.
So I don't know.
Yeah. We'll look into that.
Yeah. So all right, what else you got for me?
Maybe I think I have one more.
Okay.
Oh, I was in 32
Okay.
when Esau returns.
Yeah.
You could tell how sorry Jacob is, how bad he feels.
Okay. There. How bad he feels. Yeah. Yeah.
I guess for stealing his blessing. From
Right.
Isaac.
Right. And we know that it's already been, 14 years?
Right.
At least.
Oh yeah, because then he had
What
to
is he
work
s-
another is it
7?
6 or 10. It might have been,
Well, he has to do 7 and 7, right? And then.
and then he had to do 10 for the flocks.
Right,
Yeah.
right, yeah. So he's been gone for
24, or maybe.
at least, so
Yeah.
decades.
Right,
He's been gone
yeah.
for decades.
We'll say that.
And so they're older. They've now got their own families, and and you have to think, remember, Esau got that curse,
Yeah, he did.
but he seems to be thriving.
Right. Yeah.
So Esau might say, hey, things did kind of turn out nicely for me after
Right.
all.
Maybe it wouldn't have gone the same.
Right.
Any other way. Yeah.
That's right.
So, yeah.
So, but yeah, he's afraid, rightfully so.
Oh yeah.
Because it also looks like Esau might maybe his family, or at least his people group now. So his immediate family, like his wives and his kids, and also whoever he's taking care of.
Right.
Maybe his servants and his friends, whoever's kind of. I mean, you got to understand, these people are kind of like, they're almost like chiefs.
Yeah.
Right, of their own little, either a tribe or even a small kingdom.
Right.
Right. And so seems to be doing very well, and maybe probably even more powerful than Jacob.
Yeah.
Right.
And I always saw Esau as like a big brother that always picks on the little ones, bigger and stronger.
Yeah. And well, I think that's probably right.
Me and Will to Zach.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, as a middle child, you can step back away from it all. Yeah. That's funny.
A step back away from it, but I get blamed for it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, that's the middle. I'm also middle child. I know that feeling. So.
But yeah, that's all I had for today.
Okay. All right. Well, very good. Well, we'll keep going through, and we're going to be ending the Jacob narrative and then picking up with the Joseph narrative.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
thanks for your questions, and
Yeah. Thanks for answering.
and thank you all for joining us. So, we'll see you next time.